All right. Thank you, Coach, for joining us on here. If you would introduce yourself a little bit and tell us your story and your coaching success.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Excited to be a part of your podcast. My name is Jeremy Lade, probably more commonly known as Opie. Got involved in wheelchair basketball at a pretty young age. Actually, attended a camp at UW-Whitewater for work with Mike Frogley, who you U of I wheelchair basketball fans are pretty familiar with Mike Frogley and all that he's done. And the reason I'm in a wheelchair, I was in a car accident when I was younger. Always been interested and passionate about sports. So finding out about adaptive athletics was a huge part of my life and kind of guided my next steps after going to a wheelchair basketball camp at Whitewater. Actually got my undergraduate degree at Whitewater in physical education. So I am a licensed PE teacher. Got my master's degree at Whitewater in higher education leadership. And played, obviously, you're going to hear a lot about Whitewater, sorry. I played wheelchair basketball for 5 years at Whitewater as well. And then shortly after, I took over the job of coaching for a collegiate team at Whitewater. I held that position for 12 years. And a couple of stints before then, I coached with the Milwaukee Wizards, a junior program over there. And through my years of experience of playing and then also coaching, I've had a lot of experience working with some fantastic people. And anything that I've done as a coach or as a player, by no means is anything for me as an individual. It's more a collective what I've been able to do and work with other people over the years.
Awesome. And it's really cool to hear you've got experience in juniors coaching, college coaching. You've obviously played and coached with adult programs too. So a wide variety of different levels and skill levels. And I think the exciting part of this conversation is going to be about the fundamentals of shooting. Because I think most people that are getting started in basketball or really into basketball, the first thing they do when they get into a gym is jump into their chair and start putting up shots. And I think it's really important for us as coaches to kind of relay it's probably not the best thing for your development to just get up there and just start throwing the ball up in the air. So I've got a variety of questions that I'd love to talk more about how you teach shooting, because you've had a lot of phenomenal shooters through your time coaching, especially at Whitewater. So I first want to throw at you, when you think about fundamentals of shooting, what first comes to mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the fundamentals of shooting definitely goes back to my early days of going to camp at Whitewater. And I think one of the foundations and fundamentals of shooting within wheelchair basketball, I'm not as familiar able-bodied basketball, how they're teaching it, but is the acronym BEEF. Balance, eyes, elbow, and follow through. And that's probably my first initial conversation about how to shoot, about the basics and fundamentals of setting up your shot. And that was obviously as a player. And I think over the years of not only playing, but then coaching, I still use that BEEF acronym, absolutely. But I think I have a greater understanding of what that means for each individual. So when you talk about balance, it's initially talking about, yeah, you want a good seated position, you want to make sure you're comfortable. But as you get further along, then maybe your balance point changes based on the shot. So I think there's a bunch of nuances that you take a look in greater detail the more you advance with that. So BEEF is definitely a fundamental thing, but as with anything, those fundamentals don't go away. They just grow and improve, and you kind of pay a little bit more attention to the details of those fundamentals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you talk to kids about BEEF, it becomes kind of a joking thing. I was like, oh, it's going to be a funny acronym. But
Yeah.
national team players could still go and build on those fundamentals. When you think about BEEF, of those acronym letters, which one do you think is the one to focus on the most for developmental young kids?
Yeah, I mean, you got to start with the basics, right? So it starts with balance. If you're not in a good seated position for you as an individual, it's going to be hard to knock down a shot. I mean, it's hard to like isolate one, right? I talk
Yeah.
about from passing, from shooting, all of that stuff. If your eyes aren't locked on a target, why you think that whatever you're throwing or shooting is going to make it there, I have no idea. So certainly eyes, you got to be locked in on a target. And again, talking about the nuances, what are you looking at as a target? If I think about the movie The Patriot, right? You aim small and miss small, and that's what I talk about passing. That's what I talk about shooting. So if you're looking at the rim as a whole, that's a good concept. But to me, I like to dial that in a little bit more. The way you finish, follow through, super important. If you're the last thing that touches that basketball isn't pointing at the thing that you're looking at,
Yeah.
it's hard to think that it's going to get there. The one that I guess probably I didn't focus on nearly as much, just from experience of watching people shoot and knowing disabilities, was the elbow part of it. Getting that elbow underneath the basketball certainly helps, and you watch NBA shooters. But I think when you talk about individuals in a seated position, having that elbow underneath and still having balance, there's just a lot of different shot techniques based on disability and seated position. So while elbow is definitely important as a fundamental, I think the other three I probably focus on a little bit more.
Yeah, it really, if I could have a nickel for every time I said aim small, miss small, I'd have a small fortune for sure, right? Like, it's such a great concept. And when you've got younger kids that you say, what are you looking at? They say the rim. I'm like, do you know how big that actually is? There's so much space there. And to think about aiming at something really small really narrows yourself out. And then even if you're missing from that small target, at least you're shooting in a general direction that's going to be better than just throwing it at the rim.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's interesting too with that aim small, miss small part. I talk a lot about passing and making the game easier for your teammates, and I know we're talking about shooting right now, but when you talk about putting something in a shooting pocket for a teammate that's setting up to shoot the basketball, having that balance because you pass the basketball well, a difference of a couple of inches here or there. Is a pass catchable? Yes. Is a pass helping your teammate become a better ball player? That's that aim small, miss small concept. Put the basketball where you're going to help your teammate be a better ball player.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that I kind of picked up from some able-bodied basketball stuff is with the top 3-point shooters that have been happening over the last 5-7 years of like a Steph Curry type of shooter, the majority of the time on their release, they're kind of corkscrewing or rotating their body while they're in the air. And they're actually shooting with their lead shoulder facing the basket. And you think about it in wheelchair basketball, we don't have that ability to kind of rotate while the shot's in the air. So rotating the chair before the shot is a part of that balance that a lot of coaches may miss on there. Is really having your toes, all 10 toes pointing at the rim is probably not the best. And to turn out and away for the rim really helps with that. I'm imagining you've noticed that more as a player than you are as a coach, and it's kind of built on that way. Can you elaborate or talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of mentioned in the beginning about figuring out some of those nuances of that stuff, right? Balance kind of evolving. And absolutely, like rotating the chair. I think, I think of like a Dylan Fishbach who shoots that ball moving so well. Just an impressive ability to do that. But even when we think about the different shot types that are happening in wheelchair basketball, I think the evolution of kind of fading away a little bit from that defender. So when you talk about balance and having your shoulders over the correct point of your chair,
Yeah.
having your body over your backrest where you're at the sweet spot where your chair is going to fade back straight and not turn right or left. And then also that kind of safe balance point where you're not worried about falling over that fifth or sixth wheel. So in terms of that balance is thinking about not only the rotation of your chair when you want to release that lead shoulder, but also are you going at the hoop? Are you fading away from the hoop? Or are you sitting stationary? I think sitting stationary is one of those challenging shots. We don't see very many individuals in wheelchair basketball that do it necessarily at a high level. But part of that is you're taking a lot of that motion out of your shot. So it just takes a little bit more power. So knowing where your ideal balance point is when you're sitting stationary versus fading away versus going to the hoop versus turning. So, and I think that's kind of that evolution of shooting, right? So when we talk about having some young athletes working on the shooting fundamentals, understanding that what a good shot to be practicing is, and when you become proficient at that shot, then maybe we're starting to look at not only range, but adding to a diversity or adding, different shots into your bag of tricks, if you will.
Yeah, everybody wants to get into the gym and work on their, 360 fade away behind backboard type of shot, and it would be amazing if we had junior players that truly built on the fundamentals and got themselves so fundamentally sound that the crazy shots, those trick shots, then became something that felt a little bit more natural. And I think that kind of leads us into the next question of like, when you think about the fundamentals that you have been teaching or been playing with, How have they changed over the years from when you first started playing as a junior player, going up to being an adult player, working with national teams and working as a coach? Is there some of those things that have changed from when you were a kid to being an adult going, oh, I don't do that anymore, or we do that in a certain way?
Yeah, I would say probably more or less the way I teach the game. So
Mm,
I think coming out, I had a solid foundation of saying, yeah, beef is the way I'm going to teach individuals how to shoot the basketball.
sure.
As I got a little bit more involved and you get to know more players and you see so many players shoot the ball well, and not all of them are within that beef realm. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
there's some aspects of that maybe some really good shooters that it isn't there necessarily. So kind of working with the athlete where they are uh, is an interesting challenge when you're working with college athletes, because it's a challenge to get them to change a habit. It just
Yeah.
is, right? It's a challenge to be able to do that. So I think teaching college athletes that have been doing it for 10 or 15 years is different than teaching some young athletes that. So I think
Mhm.
when you talk about working with college athletes, it's refining some small details that are a reasonable adjustment. Whereas going in and completely reinventing the wheel and saying, "Hey, listen, we need you to completely change." Now, there's some athletes that we've done some of that stuff with, but at the same time, that's a hard sell to get them back to going into the 2 foot range when they got 15 foot range with bad mechanics or bad fundamentals.
Yeah, I mean, it brings it back to beef when we talked about the elbow, right? Like we didn't consider the elbow being something we'd really focus on. It just happened to be one of the E's in beef that you just had to work on. And you're realizing more and more the combination of what they worked on in their junior programs based on also what their physical abilities are, maybe what their disability impacts them in. Having that chicken wing elbow out might actually help them in their shot, even though it looks unorthodox. And for us as coaches, it looks real ugly. It still works for them. And I love the idea of, working where they are and working with them on their skills at where they're at. I think it's an interesting situation where college coaches, we get athletes 5 days a week and we get them for a lot of time. And these junior coaches might only get players once a week, twice a week for a little bit of time. But they get them for a lifespan when it really comes to what the child is. You get them at 6, 7 years old and get them all the way up to their 18. You really could develop a lot if you worked on these fundamentals.
Yeah, I think I spent a lot of effort to obviously refining some of those skills, but really taking a hard look at what a good shot is for that athlete within the flow of our offense.
Mhm.
And then having some of those sit down one on one conversations to say, I know that you want to shoot the three.
Yeah.
I know that you want to shoot some fadeaways. You're not shooting at a high enough percentage to make that a good shot for us or to make that a good shot for you.
Yeah.
But if you do want to make that a good shot, let's put in some time outside of practice. Let's work on some of that stuff. This is what you need to work on. So really trying to have them focus on their strength
Mhm.
within the competition aspect of things, but then turning that weakness into a strength. Kind of going back to what we're saying is meeting that athlete where they are. Like you have a
Yeah.
certain set of skills that you're bringing in. I want to use those skills, and I want to use those skills that are going to help us be successful as a team, help you be successful as a ball player, and then improve that set of skills in a time frame in which we can dedicate towards improving some stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we live in a wheelchair basketball world where unfortunately there are not multiple teams in one small area to be able to get a bunch of reps in, a bunch of play in. The majority of people that are in wheelchair basketball are having to train on their own a lot of the time, maybe by themselves in a gym or maybe with somebody that's able-bodied getting rebounds. What kind of advice would you give to somebody that wants to work on shooting? And let's just say at a developmental beginning level of shooting, what would advice you'd give to them if they had to work on stuff by themselves?
Honestly, stay in your range.
Mhm.
Stay in your range.
Yeah.
Set a good goal for yourself. If you think you're a really good shooter at 15 feet, have an idea of what a good shooter at 15 feet looks like
Yeah.
or is. If you think you're good is 8 out of 10 without a defender good? Okay, so if we're consistently hitting 8 out of 10, then we can talk about moving that range back. If you're not consistently hitting 8 out of 10, we got to move closer. We got to
Yeah.
move closer, or whatever your number might be. And then within there, I think athletes have a good opportunity to access coaches like yourself or coaches all across the country that will give some feedback and give some stuff in terms of being helpful for that. listen to some of that feedback. And then one thing that I thought was super helpful is video. We all got cell phones these days. I promise you probably think when you shoot, it looks different than what it actually looks like when you shoot. And that's from me as well. You know, I've watched film and USA basketball, and, you know, as a ball player, you think it looks one way and you watch it on video and you're like, that's not what I thought it looked like. And then you can take a hard look at some misses and makes, you know, looking at the fundamentals, even in an empty gym.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely what I was thinking too, is, you know, everybody's got a phone to be able to use video on it. And the phone's also having slow motion video and recording in slow motion. Man, you can see all the issues of your form if you can put that in slow motion. I really like that you're saying the staying in that range, because, you know, a lot of the young kids that are going to be coming in the gym are going to want to start throwing up 15, 17 footers or just try to throw up threes. And there's always the one kid that wants to roll in and just start launching half court shots, chest passes. But with staying in the range, and I think, you know, a developing athlete might try to say, you know, what is my range? How do I know what my range is? I think you notice it by physical feedback, is that when you have to change your form, you know, you're outside your range. If you've gone from a regular shooting form and now you're just really getting a shoulder in, you're trying to turning into more of a shot put type of throw, you ultimately know you're outside your range, and you've got to build strength or you got to build reps. Any thoughts on that?
No, I 100% agree. You know, one thing that I've found myself saying to athletes over and over again is the difference between shooting a 2-footer and a 15-footer is the amount of strength that you got to put into it. So, you know, the reason that you shoot a lower percentage at 15 feet is because it takes more power. And if you're shooting a lower percentage, it's because you're not strong enough to shoot there consistently. Exactly what you said. Your form is different at 2 feet than it is at 10 feet. If you can go 8 for 10 at 2 feet and you go 3 for 10 at 15 feet, then your form is changing based on distance. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's acknowledging that, and then getting into the edge of your range in which your percentage is, you know, maybe not where you are at 2 feet, but getting closer, and then get some reps. Get some reps if you can. They got a lot of great rebounding tools that you can hook up on hoops. You always got a friend, family members, you know, get some reps and getting some shots up.
Yeah. And then I think we flip it to now leaning towards the adult side of things, thinking about the adult athlete that gets 1, maybe 2 times a week, and their practice is like a lot of adult practices where it's just an hour and a half of pickup scrimmage, and they want to work on their shooting. What are some things that you would think an athlete would focus on if they want to get shots and they want to work on their form, but it's in a group setting? Any thoughts on that?
You know, I've been to enough practices to say there's a lot of time, and I'm guilty of it too. You're hanging out with some friends, you're seeing some people. There's time in between all these drills. Think about the number of shots you could get up. You know, get a quick drink and then get some shots up while everybody else is kind of chatting.
Yeah.
Maybe a good opportunity. Maybe a good opportunity to work on some stuff at that opportunity. And then same thing for juniors, right? What's a good shot for you? In finding out how you move within a scrimmage, within a game, to set yourself up to get those shots. Knowing some of that stuff is like building off of the knowledge of wheelchair basketball. That's going to allow you to improve your individual skills and have those individual skills translate into being a successful team.
Yeah, I think having intentional goals and thoughts about that scrimmage that day too. I know, even speaking with some of the college athletes, if you come into a drill and go, okay, so what's your intention in this drill? They may not even have that. They're just thinking, oh, coach told me these are the things that we're working on today, so that's what I'm going to go with. But you might have a situation where, you know, you're going to have 4 water breaks in a practice, and I want to knock down 5 free throws in between each of those, and I want to average maybe 70% shooting, which, you know, I'm doing the math there, is 14 out of 20. I want to knock those down. So having the opportunity to have an intention would be really important. And then video, I think on the other side of things, we've mentioned it before. I was talking with Frog about defensive side of stuff, is like, if you want to know in a group setting what you're doing, set your phone up in the bleachers and hit record and record the scrimmage. And then you can always come back and watch and see what's going on for your skill level. And also maybe the people you're playing with going, wow, I really thought when I was playing that Opie was really killing it in this scrimmage. And then there was somebody else that was actually shooting better. And this is what I want to watch.
Yeah, I think there's some opportunities within a practice setting as well that maybe we miss out on working on some of those shooting fundamentals. So I'm thinking like a 3-man weave drill that we've all done, right?
Yeah.
4-person weave, 5-person weave. And we've done the drill so much that it's almost on autopilot.
Yeah.
Well, what I try to talk to all my athletes about is we're going to have a specific focus going into those drills as a team. There's nothing wrong with having a specific focus as an individual. So when you go in and you get an opportunity to shoot a layup, are you just going through the motions, putting up another layup? It's one that you put up a ton. Or are you focusing on the ball leaving your fingertips and your eyes on the corner of the backboard and working on those shooting fundamentals that is going to translate to that 10-footer that you're trying to knock down later in a game setting?
Yeah, I don't know where I heard it, but the thought process of shooting miss is a diagnostic tool. It's not a miss. And then if you're shooting and that ball goes off the left side of the rim, you should be holding your follow through and seeing, oh, my hand was going to the left. That's why it went that way. Or I hit back iron because I was shooting it straight on and it went so flat, it hit the back iron and came back to me. If we don't evaluate what's happening in our shots, we're never going to get better. And we can't blame it on the rim for being the reason I miss.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big proponent of a loss is only a loss if you don't learn something from it. And I look at
Absolutely.
like a win and loss of a basketball game is big picture. It's huge. You think about the number of possessions and the number of dribbles and the number of passes and the number of picks. If you break that down into a shot attempt being a win or a loss, well, if you're going to look at the result, that's something that is very cut and dry. What I try to look at is be like, why is it a win or loss? You know, sometimes you do things the correct way. You're not going to make all the shots. It doesn't work out that way. But if your focus is having a solid follow through and you have a solid follow through and you don't make that shot and you're beating yourself up, that's you know, I mean, you're going to have a hard time growing. So the
Yeah.
next time you had good follow through, well, what's the reason that you missed? And then focus on that the next time. So learning something from everything is a learning opportunity.
Yeah. Now, if we put ourselves in the shoes of a new coach, could be a juniors coach, could be a D2, D3 coach, and they've got to be teaching shooting because they've got a talented group of athletes, but they just can't put the ball in the basket. What's some advice that you would give to that coach? And maybe what are some drills that you would recommend to that coach to get started?
Yeah. So advice for the coach, and this is, you know, just kind of what I have found to work out for me
Yeah.
is you can run a drill or you can teach an athlete. And depending on that athlete or drill, there's a million pieces of feedback you can give an athlete
Oh,
on
yeah.
any given drill, on any given fundamental. If you want to pick it apart, you can pick it apart.
Mm-hmm.
I think you got to include some positive feedback with things
Yep.
that are going well. Absolutely, because people aren't going to want to come back. There's if it's not fun, they're just not going to want to come back, or they're not going to give you the energy that it takes to be successful.
Yep.
And then kind of picking some big concept stuff that you might focus on, and give some feedback here and there. And as they start to improve that feedback, that whether it's follow through or whether it's balance or whatever it might be, and they start to get better at that, then maybe you're starting to evolve to the next piece of feedback
Mm-hmm.
versus getting in there and being like, hey, Bushy, your balance was terrible and your follow through was off and your eyes were looking over at you. Well, that's all great. Are you going to change all of that stuff in one play? I don't know if that's realistic. I don't know.
Yeah.
Having some realistic expectations that some athletes are going to be able to meet. And then in terms of some drills, I like shooting games. It gets a little bit tricky because people are competitive. People, when things get competitive, things get heated. They want to push themselves outside of what their comfort zone is.
Yeah.
Not always a bad thing, but there's a lot of shooting games where they can compete against themselves instead of competing against somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I like Beat the Pro,
Yeah.
or I like Two to Move. I like some stuff that we've grown up playing, Lightning or Knockout, whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
call that. Not necessarily an individual drill, but there's some shooting games in there that keep your focus on being a successful shooter, and then also maybe not necessarily competing against the guy next to you.
Yeah. Yeah. The first thing that came to mind was Beat the Pro. And you could also beat the pro as an individual, but if you had a partner or you had a group of three, you could just be like, we're going to beat the pro as a group and we're going to alternate shots. And for those that may not know, Beat the Pro on there, it's truly you just pick whatever pro athlete you want to go against. And when you make a shot, you get 1 point. Yeah, you could be going against Jordan for sure. You get 1 point, but if you miss, the pro gets 2 points, or however you want that rating scale to be. And then you're going to a certain point. So you're going to 21 or whatever you're going to there. You mentioned Two to Move. Can you walk me through? Is it Two to Move? Is that the drill? And
Yeah.
can you walk me through what that is?
Yeah, so similar kind of concept of like around the world.
Yeah.
And you can do this as a team or two people or an individual. If you kind of divide the court up into 7 spots, a baseline, the 45, the elbow, the free throw, and then going around.
Mhm.
If you make two in a row, then you go to the next spot. If you miss two in a row, you go back a spot. So the
Gotcha.
goal can be whatever you want, either going around the world and back or just going halfway there. You can always mix some conditioning stuff in there where you're going to shoot one and go to back, half court and back and shoot another one. Just kind of another one that you can do by yourself ultimately. Keeping it interesting to shoot, keeping it fun to shoot, and still working on some of those fundamentals.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to, your feedback on positive feedback, even as college coaches, and I catch myself all the time, is that I'll see an athlete working on free throw routine, and I've got 5 or 6 different pieces of information that I want to give to them to go there. And I've got Frog's voice in my head going, you only can give them 2. You can only give them 2. Let them work out those 2 and figure out which is the most important out of that, and let them work on that one. Because if you gave them 5, 6 different things, they've lost the first couple already.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and we're in this because we've been athletes.
Mhm.
We enjoy the sport. We've been there where we know what we're doing wrong as athletes too.
Yeah.
And even for us, that positive self talk. Anytime something goes wrong, there's 15 things being like, I should have done this and could have done this. And how many of those things are we going to be able to change? So I even catch myself in my self talk to be like, okay, I didn't do that thing well, and instead of like building off of that one thing, being like, okay, next time that's what I'm going to improve on. So I think we know some of that stuff as an athlete as well. And sometimes as coaches, we can get a little bit carried away because, yeah, we see a bunch of things that need some improvement, but reasonable expectations are something that we all
Yeah.
keep under control.
Yeah. And if they get it, like you said, praise them, right? Give them the positive feedback on it. What gets praised gets repeated. And if you constantly are praising that, and making it exciting that the coach really likes that you're doing that, they're going to repeat that more. And it's baby steps for sure. You're not going to get a 8-year-old to start shooting threes in the first couple of weeks of a practice. You got to work them into it. Yeah. Yeah. Like getting into kind of how we speak to the athletes, are there any kind of key terms or things that you say the majority of the time when you're giving feedback to shooters that encourages them or corrects them?
I wouldn't think of anything specifically as a shooter. I will say, in my coaching days, I spent a lot of time explaining what short term would mean when I talk to my players.
Mm,
So I think all of us, whether that's offensive strategy or defensive strategy, I think of, when I'm teaching one-on-one shadow, I spent a lot of time in practice. When I yell 45 to 45, my athletes had a whole paragraph of what that meant.
yeah.
But within a game setting, it just 45 to 45. And I
Hmm.
think shooting is a little bit more individualized than maybe that big concept. But I think the more you can keep it short term and quick to the athlete, but it means something to them. If that any given athlete you want to talk about their strength or weakness within shooting, and you have a key word that is going to trigger them what they got to change. That's there's some legwork in that. There's some stuff behind the scenes that go into that, but I think that initial legwork really makes the coaching aspect a little bit more impactful, a little bit more effective. And then when we talk about when they're in front of 15, 14 of their teammates, whatever it might be, and you got a one word quick response, that means a lot to that athlete.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're not spending time, beating up some kid because they did something wrong and ultimately taking away the fun of practice.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And using the one words, you don't realize how impactful it is until you get into a game or a tight situation where you can't go, all right, John, I want you to do this and then this and then and they're already running the shot clock and it's going down. To have it being on the same page and being efficient is really important. And I guess I would flip the question also to think about if we were to ask your athletes that you coached in college, what you said most often to them, either before their shot or after their shot. Like I reflect on that thinking most of the time they would be talking about arc for me, that I'd be yelling at arc, because what I believe is that most of the athletes are shooting it somewhat properly, but they're shooting it at the rim rather than on top of the rim. And any kind of arc added, I jokingly talk about, I want you to have excessive arc. Like somebody comes to the gym and watches, he goes, what's wrong with that kid? Why is he shooting it so high? That kind of arc to the shot. What do you think your athletes would say?
So a lot of my shooting mechanic conversations were probably a little bit more one-on-one. They're a little bit more individualized. So I think if my athletes had anything to say, it's probably going to be, "Hey, that's a good shot,"
Oh
and,
yeah.
and that's whether they miss or don't miss. I think one of the challenges I faced over the many years of coaching wheelchair basketball is, you brought it up in the beginning. Every athlete, the first thing they do, they come into a gym and they get some shots up.
Yep.
So when you get into a game and you get into practice setting, the challenge that I found is having all of those athletes understand what a good shot is for them, what a good shot is for the team. So instead of kind of talking about the fundamentals within the game setting, I would encourage them, listen, miss or make, that's the shot that we want. That's the
Yeah.
shot that we're working for, to give them the confidence that that's the one that we need them taking every single time. Now, with that being said, the game would get done and we would watch some video, and an athlete's going to be able to say, yeah, listen, I know we talked about follow through and that was not coming off my fingertips.
Yeah.
Or, we talked about eyes, and with the quickness that I got that shot up, there is no way I saw the rim.
Yeah.
So, some of those fundamentals were probably a little bit more of a side conversation. But I would say most of my athletes would say I was letting them know what a good shot was.
I think that's great, because I would imagine as your athletes, if that's the thing that they heard the most and that was your voice in their head, what a great thing to have them hear is that's a good shot. That's a good shot, building confidence on it. Where you would imagine coaches that may give a little bit more criticism than they do positivity, that the athlete's first thought might be something that they're doing wrong. It's like, oh, don't do this. And you see a lot of those athletes that have, they're timid in their shooting ability, or they may back off because they've been told so many times, don't shoot it, don't do this, don't do that, and it takes away their shooting ability. And I think that's really important. It's great to think about, we're creating positive thoughts in athletes' minds.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier we've had some 3-point shooters in the past.
Yeah.
So listen, we would chuck some threes, right? So it was a matter of letting them know which one are the good threes that we want to take. And honestly, we've had some shooters in the past, and I don't know if I've had any bad ones for some of those shooters.
Yeah.
But when you get that, what you see is a little bit of a domino effect. When each athlete doesn't understand what's a good shot for them, they might try to be that 3-point shooter that isn't within the schematics of what we're trying to do as a team. So just kind of reassuring them that, listen, there's some shots out there for you that are your shot, and we want you to take those shots. So making everybody feel like they're involved in that offensive set and offensive attack.
Yeah, I think when thinking about athletes like Dylan taking those threes, big things that I've always seen for you coaching in Whitewater was that the athletes took shots that they wanted to take, not ones that they felt like they had to take, which was really good. And then in doing so, it built them confidence. When they took shots, their teammates knew that that was a shot they wanted to take and a shot they could do. And then when that ball went through the basket, it just kind of doubled in confidence, and the confidence continued to grow. Is that something that you felt came out of recruitment, came out of personalities, or was that something that you built?
Probably a combination of both, but I will say we spent a lot of effort building that in practice. You
Yeah.
know, uh, Going back to what we are talking about, having Dylan or having Jeremy Meyer or having Chris Ocon or having Jake Williams. I mean, we've had some guys that are phenomenal shooters, and there's a bunch in there. I can't name them all,
Yeah.
but having those guys and them knowing what a good shot is for them, and not only knowing what a good shot for them is, but knowing how that good shot is going to set up a good shot for their teammate.
Sure.
We had some guys that weren't hitting 7 or 8 threes a game, but they were knocking down shots that we needed them to take because Dylan was taking 7 or 8
Yeah.
threes a game, or Jake was knocking down threes a game, or Derek Bisnet was. I mean, he didn't take a ton of threes for us. He was a mid range and a post up guy, and he took all of his shots. And everybody on the floor knew what shots were good shots for Derek, and not only that, but knew what shots were good shots for their teammate. So we really tried to work our offense to get what was a good shot for depending on who it was shooting that ball.
Yeah. And obviously, you've got a list of names that are really great shooters. And I would imagine great shooters, not just by the experiences, but also about tracking. Is there any specific things that you've done either in practice or in games or anything with statistics to help with shooting performance or shooting training, that some coaches that might be able to do if they just have a phone or have a notepad or something like that? Anything that you can think of?
For me, coaching wise, I stayed away from like reading stats. I didn't
Mhm.
I didn't tell my players stats if they had tough shooting games or great shooting games. I wasn't like, oh my goodness, you hit 8 threes. What you find out is they know.
Yeah.
The other guys know. They can see box scores. They can see all that stuff. I really spent more of my effort, like I said, reiterating what the shot was that we wanted from an offense, what the shot was that we wanted from them as an individual,
Yeah.
and really having some of those side conversations of I've had athletes that wanted to have a more meaningful or a bigger role scoring the basketball. Great. I get it. That's awesome. Let's talk
Mhm.
about what that means. Let's talk about what that's going to take. Let's talk about where your shots are and what are good shots for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I always felt with statistics too that, especially this newest generation of athletes, their thought process with stats was, what, how did I do? Let me look at my stats. And it never really was about me or about an individual in that. So a lot of times we'll put the stats aside and we'll try to create our own stats where, what is our turnover ratio from their team to our team? And what, can we get a certain amount of stops in a row? Or how many times can we get this, can you create those and then have the bench and the whole group committed to those stats that we can check in at halftime and go, cool, we're doing our job, what we need to be doing.
Yeah, and I think some of that stuff, talking about good shots and bad shots, you can go in and say, "Hey, Bushy, you took 3 bad shots this game," and you can call
Yeah.
yourself out in front of the group and whatever. But ultimately, like you as a ball player, you knew what good shots and bad shots were, and you took it,
Sure.
and you probably were like, "Oh, that probably wasn't the one that I should have taken."
Uh-huh.
Like we all get it, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes having those side conversations of being like, "Listen, the 3 bad shots that you took, imagine taking those away." And then think about your percentage or
Yeah.
whatever it might be too, whatever was the motivating factor for those individuals.
Yeah, I like that, the motivating factor as well. Like, what were they seeing and what were they thinking in that play? And I think for a lot of coaches, you don't throw that question at them in mid-game as, what are you thinking on this shot? Because they're not going to give you the answer you want and they don't really know either, right? But getting some motivation on watching video after the fact and go, okay, you took 4 right side screenshots. All 4 of them hit the side of the rim and came right back to you, and you shot them really fast. What are you thinking in this one? Well, I was stressed. I thought they were going to jump out at me really fast. But did you notice the defense actually wasn't jumping at all? You've got to be aware of this. Using that video, using some statistics to try to help you with that could really change an individual's mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those, those statistics, exactly what you're talking about. Like, I'm not bringing up statistics to say, hey, we want you to take less shots because you were 30%. That's not the deal.
Yeah.
I believe that you can shoot 60% when you take the shots that you're a 60% shooter at.
Yeah.
Now, you want to broaden that, you want to add to your bag of tricks. I'm happy to help you do that. These are the good shots that you can realistically be a 50-60% shooter at.
Yeah. 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 Well, when we think about wheelchair basketball, since we're still like in the kind of like prime area of training when it comes to college basketball, I feel like a lot of our athletes graduate and either go play pro overseas or they're being a part of national team programs or whatnot. We get to see where the path of the sport is going. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about what your thoughts are of the future of wheelchair basketball and how that's going. And when it pertains to shooting, what do we think about shooting, about range? You've got several guys that have gone through your program that are incredible 3-point shooters. And again, we talk about Fishbach that like he was shooting them from almost half court when he was getting really comfortable with them. Do we see this continuing to go further and further away, or are we transitioning to something else?
That's a really good question. I've had different conversations about our offense and our defense, and it's changed over my 12 years here at Whitewater.
Mhm.
And I never changed my offense because I thought it was going to be something cool.
Yeah.
I changed my offense based on my personnel.
Right.
So when we had some shooters that were throwing up some long range and we had some dudes that could score, we put up a lot of points in a ball game, not because that's the way I wanted to play every year. we did it that way because I thought that gave us the best chance to be successful on the basketball court. There was some years where we didn't put up a ton of points. We didn't take a lot of threes. So I was never like, this is our offense. We're always going to run. This is our strategy every single year. I tried to take a hard look at our personnel and look at, again, talking about good shots and bad shots. What's good shots for us as a team? And for us to get those good shots, sometimes it would take more swings. You know, if we're not good at a 30-foot three, then we probably got to work the defense down and we got to swing the ball and we're going to take a few less shots. So really, in terms of like what we've done over the past was a product of taking a look at our personnel and what we do well. And I think the more we can kind of do that, not only as collegiate programs, as junior programs, and even going into the next level, you know, what's our strength on the US team? What's our strength on the U23 team? Understanding what those strengths are instead of coming in with a set system and being like, this is how I know how to coach. This is the offense I like, and this is what they're going to shoot. Well, if you're going to shoot a bunch of threes and you don't have any 3-point shooters, it seems kind of foolish.
Yep.
You know, so if you don't have a bunch of dudes that are knockdown outside shooters, we got to have the ability to understand that the transition game and backpicking is going to generate some easy hoops. And when we get some easy hoops, that makes that, you know, 12-footer look like a little bit easier after we made a few layups. So maybe kind of understanding some of our strengths and weaknesses as we move forward. In terms of the personnel, I think that exactly what you said is when athletes come in the gym, they pick up a ball. And I think, you know, the scoring aspect of things is going to be there. There'll always be some fundamentals that we can build on, but kind of understanding strengths and weaknesses of individuals and having that play into what our game strategy might be.
I would imagine there's at least one coach here that can relate to the idea that they've coached for 20 years, but they've coached one team for 20 years because they've coached it one way, rather than what you're talking about is coaching personnel and coaching 20 individual seasons. And it's tough for some coaches that get in a way where they believe this is the way that it's successful and then may not see success and get frustrated in what that is and not being flexible enough to work with the personnel you have. I always think about that when you look at international teams, that you've got some teams that we would consider have a bunch of tweeners, the people that are 2s and 3s, got some speed and some range. And then you got some other international teams that just come up with 2 big towers of guys, 2 class 1s that get them in, and it's somebody to handle the ball. And it's interesting to see how some countries have fully committed to that. And they're like, this is our system. This is what we do. And we recruit guys to fill these roles. And then you get other programs that are just like, who are the best players we have? We're going to run a system that runs that way. If you've got a national team program, how do you run it? Do you run bigs and littles, or do you run a tweener lineup? And what do you think? What's your offense look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So honestly, I take the 12 best athletes I can find.
Yep.
And then I'm going to set up a system.
Yeah.
It's a 24-second shot clock. So if the 12 best athletes, and you got to consider classification, you got to consider lineups, obviously. You got to consider defense is a big part of it. The international game, we're talking about speed. And if that's a bunch of tweeners, let's get after it. I think our strength is going to be in transition. I think we got to run an up-tempo defense as well. So we're going to have some pressure in there. We got to keep their offense out wide. If we got a bunch of 3-point shooters, that's awesome. You know, and we got a bunch of tweeners because we got to pull those defenders out. That gives more room for the roll. Working on things in practice that would be, you know, trying to finish with somebody big behind you. That's stuff that we got to work on, because I know as us being a 3-point shooting team and not being the biggest guys, and we're not going to get straight post-ups, I'm going to work on the fundamental skills of the shots that maybe our strength is going to develop. So when you talk about having a team that can knock down threes, it's not just knocking down threes. It's what is that going to lead to? What's the next step, and how do you want to help your teammates become better? If we got a team with a bunch of towers, you know, I think if our strength is in height, you're probably running a little bit of a different offense. So in terms of like selecting a team, for me, I don't have a set. It would be very much like I was saying, you know, for my Whitewater days, we got 14 athletes. I took a look at these 14 athletes and say, listen, this is what I think is going to give us our best chance to be successful.
Talk a little bit about clarity and identity when it came to the teams that you had. So when you have a group of athletes and you start to put together a game plan of how you're going to play that season, or maybe it's a generation group where you've got a group of guys that are going to be with each other for 3 or 4 years at Whitewater together. Did you build identity for them? Did they build the identity of how they were going to play offense? And did some players just go with the process, or were there other players that were difficult to work with to say, in our offense, you are not the guy that's going to be handling the ball, but you can be successful in this?
Yeah, so all my players, if you want to ask about like what an Opieism is you're going to hear me say I'm a big why guy. So what I mean
Uh,
by that is we're going to run a drill, and I'm going to tell you why we're doing that drill. I would I never would run a 3-man weave without telling you why we're doing it. I'm not just running the 3-man weave to fill some time. We're doing it for a reason. Same thing on offense. I'm a big why guy. So why is that a good shot for us? What is that going to lead to? What's the next step? Why do we want this person shooting a 3 and this person over here, and what that's going to open up? So in terms of clarity and stuff like that, I'm definitely open and honest about stuff. There's some coaches out there that want your class ones knocking down layups, and that's not to say I don't want class ones knocking down layups, but there's some scenarios in a 2-on-1 in which I want our lower class players ceiling, because our higher class players have better balance. When they get some chair contact, they're going to be stronger finishes, they're bigger targets. So it was never, hey, I don't want you shooting the ball. It was, I'm going to play the percentages. I want to play the percentages, and this is what I'm looking for. So I kind of took away a little bit of the players' debate. So they weren't ever like, oh, Opie doesn't want me shooting this basketball. It's not that I don't want you shooting the basketball. It's that I want the percentages in favor of our team. And this is what I think puts us in the best position to be successful. So in terms of that clarity is, like I said, all my players will tell you, they hear it all the time. I'm a big why guy. We don't run a drill without a why. We don't, this is why I want you to do it.
Yeah. Well, as a coach, if you don't know the why, you're going to immediately lose the respect of the players right there. You can't be the coach of do it because I told you so, because that generation is gone. And the youth players that we have now need to know what the why is. And it's got to be a why that they agree with too, they buy in on, which is super important there, so that they're going to continue to follow through. I go back to the statistical side of things, is I think a lot of coaches may look at the stats and go, I'm going to use the stats to prove why I'm doing certain drills or doing certain things. But if you're just using numbers to try to prove it, that's really not going to get them to buy in. If they're trying to run a drill and go, what if we try this? You go, no, the numbers say it's wrong. You really got to have a why involved to build on that. So I love that you're bringing in that why concept for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've found to be helpful. For some of those drills in wheelchair basketball, it's just been repeated. So they run those drills at junior practices, they run them at camp, and then they get to college and they're running that drill again. And I think what gets lost in the mix is that exact thing is the why. So we can run a 3-person weave with a million different whys. Well, when you're running it on that Tuesday morning and your why is communication and passing accuracy and speed of getting down a court while covering some width, great. Well, then when you run it on next Wednesday, a little over a week later, that why might change. It's the same drill, but we have a different focus, and they understand that this drill means more than just going to the sideline and throwing a pass, and there's a lot more involved in that.
Yeah. Are your whys written down, or are your whys just constantly repeated and known?
My why's definitely more repeated and known, and it
Yeah.
goes back to that one word association.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll sit down and we'll sit at the whiteboard and I'll say, this every time we play defense, I want this person will always be number one. The
Yeah.
reason he's number one is that's the basketball side. The reason I'm putting a number on him is because when we rotate, instead of saying, hey, this and this, we're just going to say, we need help from this spot. When we say we need help from a certain number. So in terms of the why, it's definitely the legwork or the additional work that you put in at practice. Maybe a little bit more explaining, a little bit more precision in how you explain some things. But then when you get to that and you have that one word association, it's automatically, they have to do this. They know the why, and they don't even think about it because it's been ingrained in their brain.
Yeah. So last question before we jump into the know your coach kind of rapid fire questions about the why. I think there might be some coaches that are listening. what happens if they push back against your why and they challenge your why? Have you been in a situation like that before? How did you deal with it? Or what would you do if you were in a situation where there was somebody pushed back against your why?
There's definitely been some pushback of players that didn't necessarily agree with my why.
Mhm.
I think over the years I've developed enough of solid rationales behind my why that we
Yeah.
took away some of that debate. And over the years, I've learned to kind of guide my whys in such a way that there wasn't necessarily room for someone to come back at me to say, "Well, I don't agree with your why." You know, my athletes always knew too. I have an open door policy. You want to
Mhm.
come and chat with me, you can come and chat with me. You want me to explain the why further, let's do that in a one-on-one setting versus trying to uh, overrule my rationale behind something. And that's stated very early in a season and repeated throughout the season to say, if you guys disagree with something, if you athletes disagree with something that we're doing, you disagree with my why, you disagree with my process, I want to know. I want to chat with it. But that's a one-on-one conversation. So I really try to squash any of that debating stuff in front of a team and handle it in a one-on-one setting.
Yeah, the openness is really great. And I know for sure that being open like that, they know your first why is that you're coaching for them and you're trying to make it successful for them. So any of the other whys that you're bringing in there is not about trying to degrade them or trying to lead them in the wrong direction. You want this just as much as they do, if not more. So having that initial why and then having the open door policy of being able to discuss it, I think a lot of coaches may not have the ability to have an open door to a lot of their junior players, but technology sure can. You can jump on a FaceTime and a Zoom like this super easily and get that kind of one-on-one time to explain more of your why.
Yeah, I think the more you're on the same page with your athletes, that's as a team and as individuals. I think some of that individual connection is huge because you get to know what those athletes have as goals. And I've coached enough athletes as a goal that said they're coming to Whitewater, and when their 4 or 5 years is done, they're probably not going to play wheelchair basketball anymore. And
Yeah.
they'll be at practice and they'll get the required stuff done, and they're probably not going to go much more beyond that. My why for them and my expectations for them is different than my athletes that have come in and say, you know what, I want to wear red, white, and blue. I want to have a gold medal. Obviously, degree and academics and all that stuff comes number one. But when someone tells me that they have different goals in basketball, then my why for them might be a little bit different. You know, when you get free time and someone that isn't worried about making a U.S. team is watching a movie, well, that's someone that does want to watch a U.S. team. You're going to have to make some sacrifices in your free time.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Are you ready for your KYC, your know your coach kind of rapid fire
Yeah,
questions?
I'm nervous. I'm nervous. Let's go.
You'll be good. You'll be good. So first one, what are you reading right now? Is there
What am
anything
I
you're
reading?
reading right
So the
now?
book is called 1984.
Okay.
Anyone that knows me knows Wisconsin sports. Whew, you want to talk? Listen, go Pat, go. So listen to Aaron Rodgers on the Pat McAfee show, and he'll talk about some of his favorite books. And randomly, he just mentioned the book 1984. So I'm working through that interesting book, talking about the government kind of controlling some things, and it's an interesting read. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Are you more of a nonfiction or fiction reader when it comes to, reading books? Are you trying to learn something or are you just trying to entertain yourself?
Yeah, it depends. There's some good autobiography or biography books of different athletes that have locked me in. It was
Yeah.
good, but there's also some fiction stuff that I enjoy. So it depends. This one,
Awesome.
like I said, was guided by Aaron Rodgers. So
Yeah. You got to go with it. Got to go with it. What are you listening to right now? Either music or podcasts?
I think the genre is technically outlaw country, is what it's called.
Ooh, okay.
Some Cody Jinks just made it on country. He's pretty regular with Loud and Heavy, but Cody Jinks, some Tyler Childers, some Whiskey Myers. Yeah, some outlaw country is my jam right now.
I love it. Okay. What are you watching right now? TV, movie, or instructional?
Uh, Boy, World Series. Hey, World Series has got me. That's pretty good. And I probably, you watch all these like crime documentary series on Netflix.
Yeah.
So my wife and I like to sit down and watch some of that. We just watched The Watcher on Netflix, which is
Oh,
based on a true
yeah.
story, kind of wild.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you gotten into the Dahmer stuff at all? Is that
Yeah, I'm from Wisconsin.
okay?
We've seen it. Yeah,
I
aware
got
of
you.
the story.
I got you. Okay. Okay. Big one here. What is the best piece of advice that you've received from a coach or a person that you look up to?
Best piece of advice. Yeah, that's when you get an opportunity to do something and you are available to do it, take a shot at it.
Mm.
And I think about kids in high school and I think about kids in college. Every day somebody asks you to volunteer or go to a group or go to an organization or help out a friend or whatever it might be. And when you're available, take advantage of the opportunity, because the absolute worst case scenario, you find out something that's not for you. The best case scenario, you just tried something that's going to change your life. You had no idea you're going to be passionate about. So when you get opportunities, take advantage of those opportunities.
Awesome. I love it. Love it. Last one. Here we go. What are you grateful for?
I am grateful for, I mean, friends and family. I'm, a big churchgoer. I'm grateful for God. Give thanks to God for sure. But the world of wheelchair basketball, after years and years of being in it, some friends and weddings, and I mean, people that shape my life, and people that I text on a daily basis, and I'm thankful for the sport and all the great people that I had the opportunity to meet, and all the great people that I've got to coach and get coached by. So definitely thankful for all that.
Very good. Well, I'm grateful for you and thank you for your time of chatting with me on this. I think this will be something that we'll continue with multiple conversations on and getting some more stuff, because we kind of flirted around shooting and got into some offense and getting some culture stuff. So we got a lot more to talk about. So that'll be exciting to, build on these conversations. But I appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for putting this together. And I think the more people that invest in the sport is just going to pay dividends.
Awesome. Thank you.